Jai Gurudev.
Jai Gurudev.
So we have John Osborne with us today, and we all have seen John singing in satsangs, chanting in satsangs after puja, and during Navratri. We all love his Devi bhajans, Ganesha bhajans, and he not only internationals but Indians also connect to his bhajans when he says. And I think this is everyone in India knows him for his bhajan in his own accent, if I may. Ganapati, Ganapati. So we all know John through his singing and all beautiful bhajans that he sings. So John is associated with the Art of Living since 1988,
Correct.
and he literally built ashram. There are few walls and maybe there's some construction in ashram which he has built with his own hands while he was president or vice president in a bank. So there is a lot to know about him. To many stories from him we will listen today. Little bit more about John. He is graduate from Hamilton College, Yale University, Yale Divinity School, where he received MDiv, which is Master in Divinity, with an emphasis on pastoral counseling. He has been teaching mind, body, and stress management techniques since 1975, with the Art of Living since 1989. He's a founder. He's a co-founder of project Welcome Home Troops, which is dedicated to improving the quality of life returning veterans and their families through mind-body practices. Welcome, John.
Thank you very much, Vijay. Nice to be with you.
Same here. So, John, there are so many senior Art of Living teachers, and you were their teacher. You actually started Art of Living. You are one of the few people who started Art of Living in US, and you are associated with Art of Living since very beginning, we can say.
Correct.
So how did this journey started for you? What was your background and what were you doing at your first course?
I was involved in the TM movement before I was involved in Art of Living. And I lived in Fairfield, Iowa, and had a business there. And the business offered me the opportunity to move to California in 1988. It was an investment management business. And I decided on Santa Barbara because my wife had family there. And so the first week I was there, I was invited to a dinner with other meditators. And at that dinner, there was a pundit, Jyotishi, actually a palm leaf reader named Ramakrishna, who lived in Bangalore. And he needed a place to stay. So we had just rented a house on the beach. It wasn't a very big house, but we invited him to stay with us. We figured it was a great way to open a new house, to have a house guest. And so he stayed with me for about a week, and being an enterprising South Indian, he opened up shop in my living room and was giving readings and doing all kinds of things. And then one day he said to me, a boyhood friend of his was coming to speak at the university from Bangalore, and would I take him to see him? So I drove him to a house, actually a condo in the center of Santa Barbara, which turned out to be a condo belonging to Jeff Houck, who also has played a very important role in the Art of Living. And walked into the bedroom, and there was Sri Ravishankar. And there was no Art of Living. There was no one around. There was this Indian gentleman with a suitcase who was just traveling around beginning to teach. And a voice spoke very loudly in my left ear at that moment and said, "Take off your shoes. You're in the presence of a Brahman Gyani." And so I took off my shoes. And it was kind of don't know quite how to describe it in words, but it was a life-transforming moment. This person was standing in front of me, very familiar to me. And I recognized him, and I think he recognized me. And I started to laugh because there was some cosmic joke that I was finally getting the punchline for. And I didn't know why he was so familiar to me, but he just kept looking at me and smiling. And I also had this feeling that all the plans that I had made for my life up to that point were about to completely change, that my life was changing at that moment. I could feel it change. It was like everything in my life changed at that moment. And there was a new set of possibilities that presented themselves. So we chatted briefly that day. I was filled with confusion and wonder, and joy. I couldn't quite figure out why all these feelings were coming up inside me and why I felt like my life was changing. But I went and attended an intro talk, and then at the university, and then a course at the Santa Barbara Mission. Now, the course in those days, maybe there were, I don't know, 30 or 40 people on the course. But the course is very different in those days in that Sri Sri himself was teaching it, number one. And number two, he was still trying to...
Talk was also by Gurudev.
I'm sorry?
The introductory talk was also by Gurudev?
Only him. There was no one else around. Who else could give that intro talk? And but he was still experimenting with the Kriya and how it would be appropriate for Western viewers. So most people have taken a 30-minute Kriya when they learn the art of living. And I think mine was about 2.5 hours. And it was quite dramatic. There were people yelling and screaming and running around the room, all kinds of things. But my experience went in the other direction. It got very, very silent. When I was very young, I grew up in a little town in the country in upstate New York, and I used to spend a lot of time by myself in nature, either walking or on my bike. And I would have these experiences where I would bike at a certain speed and I would just disappear. There'd be no me anymore. I'd be one with the trees and the flowers and the animals and the sky, and it was just oneness and incredible joy, like joy beyond what you could experience, what you could express in words. And I had those experiences till I was maybe 7 or 8 years old. I thought everybody else had them. All kids were having those kind of experiences. And then they disappeared. But that's who I knew myself to be at sort of my deepest level, was that unbounded freedom and complete joy, complete bliss. But it faded away as I got older. And when I learned TM at age 17, I got very silent and had some very deep transcendent experiences, but still not that experience. But when I did my first Kriya, I went deeper than I'd ever gone in meditation. Maybe I had been meditating for, I don't know, 15 years at that time or something. And it was like a door opened deep inside me. And that experience came back of that joy and unbounded freedom. And there were tears coming down my face because I thought I'd lost that experience. And it was the most valuable thing to me that I'd ever had or ever experienced as who I was. And so tears are coming down my face. And I remember having the thought that if I could help one other person in the world have an experience like this, my whole life would be worthwhile. So needless to say, I felt transformed by that experience. And that was what maybe we would call the inner stroke of what would later be called the art of living. And also on that course, after my second Kriya, maybe, I experienced the beginning of the outer stroke of the art of living, in that I went outside on a break to get some fresh air. And if you've ever been to the Santa Barbara Mission, it's a very beautiful place that overlooks the ocean. And I was standing there by myself, and all of a sudden I heard footsteps behind me. And Sri Sri just walked up behind me and put his arm on my shoulder, and we're just looking out at the ocean together, not saying anything. And he said to me, "Tell me, who are the people in your society whom no one cares about? The people who've been thrown away, that people don't care about?" And I thought for a moment, and I said, the homeless people, for sure. And in those days, there were a lot of people who had AIDS, and there hadn't been any AIDS medicines developed yet. So people were treating the AIDS patients like lepers, like people they didn't want to be associated with, didn't want to touch, didn't want to be around. It was very hard on them. So I said to people with AIDS and homeless people, and he said, great. He said, those are the people we'll reach out to first. And we taught homeless people for free in the parks, even like right at the beginning, many homeless people in LA. And then a year later, when I became a teacher, Michael Fishman and I got assigned to working with a group of people who had AIDS. And that was very powerful experience for me. I think those people with AIDS taught me more than I ever taught them. We started with 5 people, then 10 people, then 50 people. Soon there were hundreds of people coming through these courses because they discovered on their own that when they learned Sudarshan Kriya, their T-cell counts went up. And so their immune systems got stronger, which meant they lived a little longer. So that's a whole other story, working with the people with AIDS. But I learned a lot from those people. They were at the end of their lives. They were very astute students. They had nothing to lose, but they really wanted to learn something that would help them. So that was where I understood for the first time the connection between sadhana and seva, that it was not enough just to go deep in meditation, which I've been doing for a long time, but it was important to transform that experience of sadhana into seva and to share it with somebody else and uplift their lives as well. So that first course was a very transformative time for me. And in those days, it was very easy to have access to Gurudev because there was nobody around. So after the course, I asked him if he'd like to come to my house for tea and puja. I was still doing Guru Puja, which I'd learned in the TM movement. And he said yes, and he came and he came to my house and did Guru Puja. There were maybe 5 people there. And because I was living on the ocean, we took a walk on the beach. And I said to him, you know, you look very familiar to me. You seem very familiar. Have we been together before? And he just gave me a smile and said, yeah, many times we've been together before. And then I said, I don't know what you're going to do, but I have a feeling you've come to do something very big, very positive for the whole planet. I said, I'd like to help you do that. He said, it'll help you, it'll happen all by itself, he said. And then I remembered the story from the Srimad Bhagavatam, where Indra, for some reason, gets angry at a village and decides she's going to punish the village by drowning the village with a rainstorm. But Krishna takes pity on the village and holds up a mountain to protect the village. Everyone in India knows this story. And then the people decide they want to get involved. So they put up sticks under the mountain, even though they're not really doing the lion's share of the job. And so I looked at him and I said, I have my stick up for you. And that was a transformative moment. That was a moment where I said, not only have I benefited from this, but I want to make your work my work. I want to help you do whatever you came to do on this planet. And he just gave me a big smile. But something shifted inside me when that happened. And so I started to look for opportunities to help him. So the next weekend we were in Los Angeles. I helped him set that course up. That was when Michael Fishman came to the Art of Living. There was a Guru Purnima celebration in the middle of that course where there was maybe, 30 people at the Guru Purnima celebration at a yoga center. And then the weekend after that, I was in San Francisco with him, helping on that course. And many people who would be very instrumental in the Art of Living were on that course. A guy named Chandler Clark, who became our president later on. A guy named Judson Trapnell, who was our first president, as it turned out. He had been my roommate at Yale. Many other people. And then I went on a 10-day silence course in Canada right after that. I was a little bit hooked on this experience. And that was a very famous course many people have heard about, called the Dunda course, where we meditated with sticks. And those experiences on that course were so powerful that Sri Sri said we have to put the sticks away. We won't do that again for a while until people are ready for it. People were having such experiences of Shakti that they were like bumping into doors, having a hard time sort of functioning in regular consciousness. But recently, he said, maybe it's time for a Dunda course again. So that's 30 years later. But that happened in Canada. And so it happened that whenever he was in the country, I would fly to try to be with him. And then the next year...
Can you tell me more about the... So we have heard about the Danda course in one of our senior teachers' experiences, Shashi Navalakha, but that's in Hindi. Can you tell a little bit about Danda course and how it was?
I've been sworn to secrecy about it from Gurudev. He hasn't say much about it. I'll just say that each person was given a stick, like a Danda, that a saint would have. And you carried that stick with you everywhere. You couldn't let it out of your sight. And you had to have it right within reach. And he would do meditations. And I'll just say that the stick became an extremely powerful instrument of spiritual transformation.
Even the stick was conscious, is it?
Yeah, the stick became the medium for transmitted transformation. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
Very powerful. Very,
Very
very powerful. And so then he went back to India. Maybe he came back later that year. But whenever he was in the U.S., I would somehow find a way to leave my job and go and help him. And
so what were you doing as a job that time?
I was an investment manager and trading investment funds, and then through a computer at home. And then I became vice president of a bank that was a division of American Express. Even that was funny, because if you've ever been to California, Santa Barbara, where I was living, is a very beautiful place. Small city right on the beach, kind of Mediterranean climate, a place anyone would like to live, like some of the nicest places on the coast of Kerala, maybe. LA is one of the biggest cities in North America, 8 to 10 million people, lots of traffic, some pollution, hustle bustle. And I drove Gurudev down there one day to attend a talk, and we're driving on the freeway. And he looked at me and he said, "You know, you're going to be working down here one day." And I said, Panditji, because that's what we called him in those days, I said, "I don't even like to drive here, let alone think about working here." And he said, no, it'll be very good. The people that you work with will want to do art of living, and the people in art of living will want to work with you. And sure enough, in 6 months, I was offered this job as vice president of a division of American Express, a private bank. And I commuted, maybe I had to get an apartment in LA because I was down there like 4 or 5 days a week. And then I would go back to Santa Barbara on the weekends. So once I started working at that bank, I was lucky enough to get Fridays free from the office. I could work at home. And so every Friday afternoon, that next year, I'm getting ahead of myself, Sri came back and we had a teacher training, the first teacher training in the United States. It happened in my living room in Santa Barbara. But once we became teachers, every Friday afternoon, I would fly somewhere in the United States. There were only maybe 3 or 4 of us in those days that were capable of traveling and teaching. So every Friday, I would travel somewhere in the United States, and there'd be a group of people that had somehow heard of art of living. There were no satsangs, there were no really volunteers, but maybe 1 or 2 persons would set up a course for you somewhere. So Friday afternoon, I would fly. Friday evening, Saturday, Sunday, I would teach. Sunday evening, I would come back by plane, and then Monday morning, I'd be back at the bank. And there were probably several years where that was my routine, 3 or 4 weekends a month. Work at the bank, teach on the weekend, work at the bank, teach on the weekend, like that. Michael Fishman and Jeff Houck were also beginning to do that. We were the 3 that started teaching around the country. I think you might have another question. Do you have another question?
No, the flow is very nice. I would like to listen to more of what happened then.
So
right to the moment when you started the foundation in US, or some funny moments during your volunteering days, when still you were not a teacher, probably before going to a TTC. Were there any funny moments when you, as a volunteer?
We were very eager, but we were green volunteers, and we made lots of mistakes. And oftentimes people's egos came up, and personalities, there's some strong personalities in the art of living, people would bump into each other. But I think the craziest and most embarrassing thing that I remember doing at that time, Sri was still doing long Kriyas. And so there was a lot of emotional processing and purification that would happen. And so even when he finished the Kriya and people were supposed to lie down, they'd still be sitting up and yelling and screaming, some of them, and crying or laughing, and they couldn't settle down. So he would take a rose from a vase on the stage and put it on his third eye, and he'd go around and he'd tap people. And as soon as he tapped them on the head, they'd just fall down as if they had been, I don't know what, given a sleeping potion. They just fall down and immediately fall asleep. And sometimes he'd have to do this with 20 or 30 people on a course. He'd just go and bop them on the head with a rose, and they'd fall down. That's how he got them to rest. And usually there were a lot of volunteers around, and they could keep the course kind of going, and he would do that himself. But there was only me in this room with him on this particular day, and people were screaming, and he was trying to make one of the first Kriya tapes. So he was kind of struggling with a tape machine up front, trying to make a Kriya tape, and didn't want to leave that. So he put a rose on his third eye, and he gave it to me, and he kind of motioned me, go bop those people. And I couldn't believe that he'd asked me to do it. And I didn't know that anything would happen, but the first person that I bopped, they just fell down on the ground. And went to sleep. And I thought, oh my gosh, second person that I bopped, the same thing happened. So I went around the room and I was bopping people. But as will happen to human beings, I got this great feeling not only about the bopping and the rose, but about myself. This is such an amazing piece of seva. And how did I get to do this? And most importantly, whoa, what could I do with this rose? I felt like Harry Potter with his magic wand. Whoa, this rose could do this. This rose could do this. This is a magic rose. And all of a sudden I felt this heat on the back of my head. And I turned around and Gurudev was looking at me with a sort of a bemused look. And he's like, you can give me the rose back now. So you have to be careful about possibility of doership. You are not the doer, you are the instrument. And every course that I teach next to his picture. I have a picture of him right now, actually. And I remind myself, whoop, there it is, that I'm not the doer, that I am not teaching this course. He's doing it. And I look to him for guidance all during the course. So the summer of that next summer of 1989 is when we had the teacher training. And there were, I think, 12 people on the teacher training. And of that 12 people, 5 of us were made teachers. And it was pretty amazing because all the people were living in my house and Gurudev was there as well. And people would come for satsang every night, maybe 50 people, 30, 40, 50 people. And it was a very magical time because not only was he teaching us, but he was working with us individually. And you could ask him any question you wanted to ask and he would get involved. You could ask him personal questions. You could ask him questions about your growth or challenges you're having in your life. And I really feel like it was those times in the early years that really formed me more than anything else in art of living and in seva to him. And the most hilarious part of it, that teacher training, was on the last day, we thought we were about to be made teachers. And he said, oh, one more thing. We had a kind of a back area in the garden where there's a big table and a spa and a fireplace. And he said, you go back into the garden and that picnic table, all 12 of you, he said, and just sit there and criticize each other. And don't stop until you feel like you've said everything you have to say. And so it went on for, I think maybe 2 hours. And people were not gentle with each other. People were, just, you're always this way, or you're such an egotistical person. Why do you always say this? And you're always doing this. It was very harsh. And it got so harsh that one person actually got up from the picnic table in tears and ran away. And that person was disappeared for about, 12 or 18 hours. They came back in late that night. But it was very hard. We were hard nuts. And I think Panditji Guruji was, he had his hands full working with us. And we got through it somehow. And I think 4 or 5 of us were made teachers. I wasn't sure how we would teach the course because it was so obviously, a function of his grace. And I didn't really feel either prepared or worthy. But he gave me a cassette tape and he said, you play this tape. He said, and you chant 3 ohms before you teach the Kriya. He said, I'm always there by the 2nd ohm. And so my first course was just several weeks later. It may have been the first course in the country. There's a little discussion about who taught the first course in the United States. But if it wasn't the first course, it was one of the first courses in Washington, D.C. at a Catholic boys' school called St. Anselm's. And I was terrified. I didn't know how the Kriya would happen. All I had was this little cassette tape and I'd never taught with it. And so I did Guru Puja. I knew Guru Puja from the TM movement. And I bowed down and I thought, somehow it's all going to be all right. And then I put the cassette in the cassette player at the right time during the course, pushed the button, and it was exactly the same feeling as it was when he was in the room teaching. So that's the first time I had this experience, maybe, or one of the first times, that he's much bigger than his physical form and that he can be anywhere in the world when you need him or where you need him to be. And another experience that I had at that time was when we were setting up the papers for a foundation, because you have to be a legally recognized nonprofit, recognized by the government. So I was drawing up a budget, which was a funny thing because we didn't really have any money at that time. And he came, looked over my shoulder, Sri Sri did, and he said, make sure you put plenty of money in there for lawyers and accountants, because one day millions of people are coming through this foundation. And I thought, but didn't say, poor fellow, somebody's got to teach this guy some English. What is he talking about? Millions of people. There's like 50 people in the foundation right now. And I think he must have read my mind, because he looked at me and he said, John, my English is very good. He said, when I say millions, I know what I'm talking about. And so I thought, wow, how is he going to take care of millions of people? I was very embarrassed, actually. And I was thinking, what else was I thinking 5 minutes earlier that I didn't know that he could pick up? And that troubled me, because he had taken such good care of us in a very personal, intimate, loving way. And I wondered, how is that going to happen for millions of people? So when he was staying at our house, we had a big rose garden, 100 rose bushes in the back. And he would go by himself and walk in the roses at sunset. He just liked to do that by himself. And I didn't want to disturb him, but this pressing question kept coming back to me again and again, like, how are these people going to be taken care of? So I walked back there and I smiled, and he smiled and motioned to me that I could come over and talk to him. And I said, I understand what you said this morning, but if millions of people are coming, how are you going to take care of them? How are you going to take care of them like you've taken care of us? And he said, I'll tell you a secret. He said, on the day you're born, the day anyone's born, they have as many brain cells as there are people on the planet at that moment. He didn't tell me I couldn't tell this secret, so I've told it to a number of people since. And then I had to ponder that. So being in connection with all these people has something to do with brain cells. And I said, so if someone comes to you or is connected to you or is taking a course with you, that person gets a place in your brain. He said, it's kind of like that. When I said, well, if somebody needs your help, how will you know which person it is? And he said, if I pull one hair on your head, John, I said, you feel that one hair, right? And I said, yeah. He said, it's like that. He said, I can be in touch with anyone. And it's not I that make the connection, it's they that decide they want to make a connection with me. And when they make that connection, or they decide they want to have a connection with me, or they feel that connection, then they have that. And I didn't completely understand that answer. I mean, I thought I did, that he'd be in touch with them from a distance if they needed to be in. But I was traveling with him about 25 years later in a hotel somewhere, not in the United States, in another country. And I was with him right before he went to sleep, and he got in his sleep doty and he brushed his teeth. And then he sat up in bed right before he went to sleep and closed his eyes. I also closed my eyes, but I had the feeling that we weren't meditating, something else was happening. And so I opened my eyes, and when he opened his eyes, and I said, were you meditating? He said, no. He said, I was going around the world sending a blessing to everyone who asked for one that day. So that's when I knew that he had this ability to be connected to millions of people at once, and to bless those people and to give them what they need when they ask for it. So that was also a big wake-up moment for me, even 25 years later.
And how was your first visit to India, to Ashram?
Oh,
Bangalore Ashram.
There wasn't much Bangalore Ashram in 1991. There were a few buildings. I stayed in a converted garage with Michael Fishman and a wonderful person who's become one of my closest friends in the art of living, a guy named Chris Kieran Burt from Germany. And